that on that day, Bionca Ellis also was having an ordinary day. And you will see through the video that we will show you, ladies and gentlemen, and there are going to be witnesses. Witnesses from Volunteers of America. You will hear from witnesses from Giant Eagle. You will hear witnesses from the police department. For Bionca Ellis, you will see that she went to the police department on that day. She went to the North Olmsted Police Department. She had a conversation with a police officer at the window. And that police officer will come in and testify to their conversation. Bionca Ellis did not like what she heard at the police department, so she leaves. And the evidence is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that she went directly to Volunteers of America. You will hear the testimony from Diane Spihar, who is one of the managers of Volunteers of America. And on that particular day of June 3rd, 2024, she was working in the back, sifting through stuff to put out for sale. And Bionca Ellis comes back. Well, the evidence is going to show through video that prior to going back to the Volunteers production area, Bionca Ellis had spent several minutes sifting through a bin of knives, and she chose 2 knives. You will see that, ladies and gentlemen. You will see her in Volunteers of America walking up and down the aisle. She had a conversation with Diane Spihar, looking for a bathroom. The evidence is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that she left Volunteers of America and that she went to Things Outlet. And you will have the opportunity to look at that video. Bionca continued to go into the store. She looked around, and you will see the video of that. She didn't chat with anybody, but she leaves. The evidence is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that as she leaves, there is a cement pillar. And I want you to pay attention, because she takes those 2 knives and she hits them against the cement pillar to see their pliability. One knife that she had stolen drops to the ground, but she keeps the 12-inch butcher blade knife in her hand. The evidence is going to show, and the video corroborates, that she walks in to Giant Eagle. And you will see through the videos, from the customer service angle, you will see inside the store where Margo Wood and Julian are shopping. You will notice, ladies and gentlemen, in the video, Bionca Ellis coming in to Giant Eagle, and she's got the 12-inch butcher knife. And she has it right by her side, and she's walking, and she's walking. And you will see in the video, ladies and gentlemen, that Margo had paid for her groceries. She had her hanging basket on her cart, the child in the seat of the cart, walking out, going to load her groceries and go home. I want you to pay attention to the video as Mrs. Wood is walking out with Julian, and they're actually having a conversation. Miss Ellis passes them going this way, for lack of a better word to describe. She would be going west, and they are coming east. And so therefore, she sees them walking, and she turns immediately around. And she follows them all the way out of the store. And you will see that she is walking in tandem with them. There'll come a point in the video where you will see that she is walking faster, so she passes them. She stops, waits for them to catch up, and follows them completely out of the store. The cameras outside, ladies and gentlemen, pick up that Margo goes down one aisle. Mrs. Wood is going down the aisle where her minivan is parked, and the evidence will show that this defendant is right on her heels, walking right behind her. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to show, the witnesses are going to testify, that they observed Bionca Ellis approach Mrs. Wood and Julian, and she goes and takes the knife and stabs Julian in the face. Miss Woods tries to fight her off. She stabs Mrs. Woods. And there are independent witnesses that were in the parking lot that sees her stand over Julian on the ground and plunge a knife into his back. And those are common, ordinary citizens that were there grocery shopping or going to grocery shop. Of course, screams were heard throughout the parking lot. People are screaming to call 911, and you will hear from Travis Bush, who sees the stabbing. You will hear from Matthew Stroud, who sees the stabbing and tells his wife to call 911. They all run over. You will hear from Cheryl Molaski. She's a nurse. She runs over. She's one of the first people that runs over, and she says that Miss Woods has that baby so tight that there is blood pouring out of that. She tells him he's got to put him down, and they start compressions. You will hear from Miss McClaskey. You will hear from Miss Craven. They are both nurses. One is a pediatric ICU nurse. She relieves her. They take turns. The police arrive. Meanwhile, the other witnesses are going to testify that after stabbing that child, Miss Ellis, taking her knife that is now clad in red blood, and she walks away. Just walks away very nonchalantly. The police now have surrounded the parking lot, and they tell her to stop. She immediately takes the knife and throws the knife. The same weapon that she used to kill Julian. She's arrested. She is taken into custody. Police officers will come in and they'll testify to their life-saving measures that they tried to use on the child. You will hear from officers that took crime scene photographs. You will hear from officers, drone footage was taken of the area. You will hear from Shayna Gray from the medical examiner's office that'll talk about the trace evidence that was found and DNA, the DNA that matches Bionca Ellis. You will hear from Dr. Elizabeth Mooney, who's the medical examiner, an assistant medical examiner here in Cuyahoga County, who will tell you what the cause and the manner of death is.
All right, we'll pause it there and quickly turn to Florida for the Spencer hearing for convicted killer Jose Soto Escalera. Today, a judge heard final arguments from the defense, offered some background on Soto Escalera's family. Under advisement and plans to announce his decision on Friday, October 10th. All right, coming up next here on Court TV, folks, the state wraps up its opening statements, and then the defense breaks down the defendant's background, explaining how she was not in her the Texas man is sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty ahead of his trial. The family of 4-year-old Cash Green had to say to the man he stabbed him to death. Keep it here on your front row seats. We're watching opening statements in the Toddler fatally stabbed murder trial of Bionca Ellis going on in Ohio. Let's go back in now for more of opening statements.
And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, you will hear from Dr. Stephen Nausinger, who is the state's witness, rebuttal witness for this not guilty by reason of insanity. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Pateo and I have the burden of proof. We accept the burden of proof. The charges for you to consider in this case are those of aggravated murder, murder, felonious assault, child endangering, attempted murder of Margo Wood, felonious assault of Margo Wood, tampering with evidence, and theft. Ladies and gentlemen, the state is confident that when you hear all the evidence in this case, and again, I ask you, pay attention to actions and to words. They're very, very important in this case. And when you do that, you will find Bionca Ellis guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for each and every count of this indictment. She knew what she did. She appreciated the wrongfulness of her actions. You be the judge of her actions. Thank you, Your Honor.
The age of 22, diagnosed with schizophrenia. And Bionca has been treated on an outpatient basis at a place called Murders Taylor for almost 10 years. There's been a lot of ups and downs as it relates to her treatment. You'll hear from her mother, Yolanda Eggleton, and she'll come in and she'll testify the struggles of trying to get Murders Taylor to medicate Bionca, because Bionca, when she's on her medication versus when she's off her medication, she's two different people. And she pushed hard for Murders Taylor to try to do something about Bionca being on medication. And Murders Taylor's response was, she doesn't represent a danger to herself or others, so there's nothing that we could do. She's saying how she lost contact with Bionca over the course of 6 to 8 months prior to this event. And I'll tell you that no one's going to dispute, the evidence will show that she's a mentally ill person. Between January of 2024 up until the date of this incident, June 3rd, 2024, Bionca was off of her medication. The medication, the evidence will show, stabilizes her. Bionca received a Social Security check. And what she did with that check was she traveled from the state of Ohio to the state of California. She traveled from the state of California back to Ohio, and then down to Florida, and eventually back to Ohio. During that time frame, there were many occasions where Bionca exhibited mental illness. There were occasions where she would go to a particular location and try to get herself arrested because she's living in a homeless shelter, because she's living on the streets. She's trying to find structure. I think the evidence will show that during her mental illness, she tried to find a place of refuge, unsuccessfully. On June 3rd of 2024, this unfortunate tragedy occurs. Just a few days before, Bionca was in the North Homestead jail.
All right, we'll hear more from the defense in just a minute. Let me bring in our guest for this hour, attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice. Randolph, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for joining me on this Monday. First and foremost, let's start with what we heard from the prosecutor. Now, we know this is a case where it's not guilty by reason of insanity is what the defense is claiming. But the picture building blocks that we seem to have here. Someone who has struggled with it over the years, has a diagnosis, someone who needs drugs to function in society, someone who was not on their drugs that day, and someone who does something. Because when you look at it, who would do that except someone who was in a psychotic state? They have experts, they're going to go against each other. Video obtained by the Daily Mail shows Brown abducting Cash while he was sleeping in his crib. Prosecutors say that Brown later Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael. The defendant, Bionca Ellis, is facing multiple charges, including murder and attempted murder in the stabbing death of 3-year-old Julian Wood. Now, he was stabbed in the face and back while his mother was pushing him in a shopping cart in June of last year. His mother was also stabbed, but she survived. Let's go back and hear more from the defense. They reveal more about her background, saying that her mental illness is to blame in its opening statement.
She committed that act in broad daylight, never trying to conceal the knife, and she doesn't run away. She walks away, knife in hand, still carrying the knife after this act is done. The evidence will show that there was no rational motive for her to have committed this offense. There's evidence will show that there's no relationship between she and the victims in this case. She still has a knife in hand at the time that the police confronts her. And she does drop it. Bionca's brought back to the police station. And eventually, she's interviewed. There's evidence of mental illness that occurred as a result of her responses in that interview. There's evidence that would show that she was irrational at all points of time. During that interview, while in the jail, even when she arrived in the county jail, sitting naked on the floor. Bionca displayed mental illness from the beginning of this incident, for the months prior to this incident, while in the jail. And if by chance you saw her at her arraignment, the evidence will show that even during her arraignment, she was still mentally ill because she was smiling at the arraignment. The evidence will show that she answered the judge in Spanish when being asked questions. The evidence will also show that we had a difficult time communicating with Bionca. So much so that Dr. Sarah West became involved in the case. And she had to make an evaluation of whether or not she was competent to aid in her defense. And because her mental illness was still going on, Dr. West referred her to North Coast Behavioral. North Coast is a place where mentally ill people, they're there to get restored and for other reasons, but for Bionca's purposes, it's for restoration, to get her confident so she can understand this process. So after the competency evaluation, Dr. West was requested to evaluate her for sanity. And the evidence will show that Dr. West did evaluate her for sanity. She looked at all of her prior psychiatric treatment over the many years since she was age 22, her behavior on the day of the incident, and all the other information that she took into consideration after. And Dr. West made a determination that she was insane at the time of the offense. You hear that evidence. But the state has a right to have their own doctor become involved. And Dr. Knopfsinger also made his evaluation, and he made the opposite determination. You'll have to make that determination based on the evidence that's presented in this case. You'll hear from some other doctors that dealt with her while she was at North Coast. And at the end of the day, you will have to make the determination. And I told you in the beginning during jury selection that she acknowledges through her lawyers, whether she testifies or not, that she's responsible for the murder of Julian. She acknowledges through her lawyers that she's responsible for the attempted murder of Margo. There's no running away from that. That's not what this trial is about. The evidence will show, though, that it is obvious that she was insane at the time of the offense. And no matter what your experiences have been, you have to evaluate that information. That's all we're asking you to do. Lastly, I believe that at the conclusion of this case, you will find that Mr. Johnson and I have met our burden of a preponderance by the evidence, okay? A preponderance of the evidence, and that burden is far less than what the state has to prove. Thank you.
Thank you.